facility?
Alvin from the dual floor facility.
I'll let the entrepreneurs introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce Melvyn after. I'll start with Maxima. Hi, Maxima. You can just tell us who you are and a brief on the kind of business that you're running.
Good morning, all. I am Maxima Nsimenta. My name means the greatest, and how can I thank God? I run a business called Livara. We manufacture natural and organic hair products, but then also it goes beyond just manufacturing the hair products. We are also, we run a number of salons where we create the usage of the products, and are also streamlining our supply chain so that we can produce the shea butter, which is our core raw material, to supply it in bulk, and then also explore other raw materials that we use to make the product so that we become bulk suppliers, and then also explore other options for using the raw materials as food ingredients as well, because they are. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, that's me. Oh, plus I'm God-fearing and I have 2 kids.
Thank you, Maxima. Over to you, Tadeo.
Morning. My name is Tadeo Wire. I manage Agribiz Uganda Limited. We are processors of milk, dairy products. We currently process yogurt and ice cream, but we are trying to expand our distribution footprint and also expand our capacity to produce. I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, over to you, Daniel.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Daniel Pakachi from Finford Limited. And on the call, I'm joined by my 2 partners, Deo and Richard. And just well.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, Finford is a microfinance, is a tier 4 microfinance, and we're basically involved in the business of lending. We've been in the market for slightly over 3 years. And yeah, we're glad to be here.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Over to you, Sean.
Hello, my name is Sean Clark. I'm responsible for Clark International University, which is we've been in existence for 15 years now. We're just in the process of getting our charter. We've just grown to, we've just exceeded the 1,000 student mark. We've got 1,080 students now at the university, which is quite a milestone. We primarily are a health sciences university, but we have more recently diversified to do programs in IT and business. Yeah. I also operate a primary school, a junior school. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for those introductions. So right now, without saying so much, I'll ask Melvyn, who is our guest today, to just give us a brief introduction about himself and what he does.
Thank you very much, Brenda, Alvin, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I think there are different understandings of your respective businesses. It's great to see such a variety, I think, of businesses. I guess by way of background, and I guess where I'm today, so Melvyn Lubega, Ugandan by origin. My exposure to this particular topic around fundraising and building, I built 2 businesses. One was a fintech, which I sold to one of the banks in South Africa. And the most recent business I built was a software company, which we built and scaled to have teams across 14 countries and clients in 35 countries. And I guess the key crux for this particular conversation is in that particular journey, building that business, we raised about $400 million from international investors. And so from that perspective, have exposure of, I guess, raising capital and hopefully picking investors, but also in the same vein, today. I focus as a venture capital, like a venture capitalist focusing on early stage technology businesses, and so investing across Africa, and proud to have Ugandan companies in our portfolio as well. And so I guess my vantage point today is more one from, I guess, being an entrepreneur and raising capital, but two, also, I guess, an investor investing capital.
All right, thank you so much for that, Melvyn, and we are honored to have you. I think you will be able to add value to our entrepreneurs who have recently been introduced to a couple of investors. So like we had mentioned before, the purpose really is for us to hear from Melvyn on how, because he's been on the entrepreneur side and he is on the investor side as well. So he will be able to give us good guidance on how, as an entrepreneur, you can choose the right investor. Because I note that for sure, lately we've been having lots of investors speaking to us, and we may not be able to, to know what to look out for. So Melvyn, maybe before we go right in, allow me to mention that this is conversational. Would like this to be interactive. So if you have a question, kindly raise your hand, and then we will give you the opportunity to ask. But as we start, I think the first thing for us to go into is, as an entrepreneur, Melvyn, what should we look out for when we are having discussions with investors?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think I would take a step back, and before you speak to an investor, have a clear sense of why you want the investment. It goes without saying that one wants money. But I think what's quite great about the different businesses that you're in is different businesses require different types of capital. So if you're doing a microfinance play, as the gentlemen are, you may need debt capital. If you're running a university, you may need working capital. If you are building a facility on Maxima on your side, you may need asset financing. And so it's easy to say, all I want is equity and I want to give shares for that. Hey, Ali, welcome. And so from that perspective, it is a function of first understanding why you want the capital. I've often found, especially where you guys are now in a great situation where you're seeing lots of investors' interest. I always say, if you don't have a clear sense of what you want, then the investors will have a clear sense of what they want from you, and therefore you find yourself in a situation where you aren't getting the best investor, but most of the one that speaks the loudest is the most convincing. And the only concern is most investors, you can't kick them off your cap table once they're there. And so from that perspective, you need to make sure you're more discerning. Is this someone that you can see yourself building for the next 8, 10, 12 years in your journey? And I think it's important to have that alignment when you're having those conversations. So it's almost like, when I know maximize your to kids, like when you're thinking about kids or family, you don't want to be, a shotgun approach in that regard. I think it's very easy, I find, as entrepreneurs, when you're looking for money, to be like, this guy's giving me money at the best terms with the least dilution, and therefore I'll take that money. And I was fascinated. I listened to a podcast yesterday by a guy called Bill Gurley. So Bill Gurley was one of the most prolific VC investors or tech investors in the US. He was early into Uber. He did eBay. He's done a few deals, and he's returned I think it was 750 times his money he's invested. And what he was saying ultimately is his company will often not give the entrepreneur the best terms they get, but they're true partners in the business. They feel like they are, as a firm, a co-founder that the entrepreneur never had. And so not everyone is another co-founder. Not everyone necessarily needs to have a big brand investor, but just having a clear sense of that is so important to help you discern what is going to help you, not necessarily get from where you are to listing your business, but from where you are to the next phase of your growth in the most effective way. And I think that comes back to the point of knowing where you are, knowing where the investor is. I think everyone would love to have a SoftBank as an investor, but SoftBank may not necessarily be a good investor, let's say, Sean, in your situation, when you're building schools. And so it's important to know that even though the investor may have a different objective, that those two align, because in the heat of trying to get the deal done, everyone will make representations about what's important for them. And so for me, I often like to understand what other investments similar to mine has the investor made, to get a sense of whether they understand the space, whether they understand the working capital cycle, the cash flow cycle, and so they have empathy in how the business ebbs and flows for that period of time. And so I think once take it back, understand, one, what you want the money for, importantly, to deeply understand the investor you're getting the money from, and then whether that exposure in the space. And I think three, the final point is, don't be afraid to be intentional. I think it's almost saying like, looking, what value are you bringing as an entrepreneur? What value are they bringing as an investor beyond just the capital? I think it's important to have those conversations up front, because it shows that you are intentional. It's the same way like when you start a job, I'm sure many of you entrepreneurs haven't started jobs. When you hire someone and you're discussing, salary, the reality is that once the person signs the contract, there's not much scope to start discussing about remuneration and benefits. And so as an investor and entrepreneur relationship, you also want to have those conversations up front to manage the expectations and set the expectations. So by the time you are signing away shoulder agreements, pay away, all that good stuff, you have a good understanding of what are the expectations of the relationship. And the decision can be simple. I just want your money paid into my account next week. That's okay, but as long as you are intentional about that particular ask.
Oh, wow. I don't even know where to start from. But I think the one thing that I've picked up, and it's something that we were going to bring up for discussion, is the importance of investors having industry expertise in the area of your in the area of operation for the entrepreneurs. I think that is something that Melvyn has brought out. It's important for you to know that the investor is going to be able to add value, and like he mentioned earlier, to understand, for example, your working capital cycles, or your supply chain. In that way, you're able to negotiate better terms. Any questions at this point? Anyone have a question?
And just for context, I mean, so in my investment life, across probably all of your sectors I've probably invested, except maybe Maxima. I haven't used any hair products for obvious reasons, but I think so. Sean, in your space, we actually are building 100 schools in Eastern Europe, and I serve in a few university boards and investment committees there. So happy to give color in that space. On the agri side, done some meaningful transactions there. The deal we did 2 years ago, one, I think it was private equity deal of the year in South Africa, where we helped a milk and red meat producer commercialize. And so if there are any questions even outside fundraising, happy to, at least where I have experience and expertise, happy to lend exposure there.
All right. So during our conversation, Ali joined us. Ali, we had done introductions before you joined, so that Melvyn can have an idea of the sectors that are being represented here. So Ali, you can quickly introduce yourself, who you are, and what business you're running.
Thank you very much, and sorry I'm late. Melvyn, pleasure to connect, and thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. I am a coffee exporter. Started the company in 2017, and we're exporting around 6,000 tons last year, to give you an idea of the size of the business.
Amazing. Thank you, Ali.
All right, thank you, Ali. And I see Dr. Emmy, you are here as well. So kindly your name and the kind of business that you run.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mwasura. I'm the managing director and co-founder of a company called One Energy Solutions. We market and distribute liquefied petroleum gas together with solar home systems. We call it the hybrid product to communities in Uganda.
All right.
Thank you for inviting me, and it is nice to be in here. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Maxima, you can unmute and ask your question.
I was typing it in. So anyway, my question, you're a Ugandan entrepreneur and you've raised hundreds of millions for your companies. My question is, were your companies listed? Were they registered and started in Uganda, or were they abroad? And then also, when you were raising money, did you have to register the company, say in the US or in Europe, in order for you to attract better monies to bring back here? Suppose if your company was were in Uganda. That's my question.
So interesting question. And I think, so the context to me starting my business, so I've had businesses in Uganda, some in South Africa, and some US, UK. I guess our biggest ones, so Go One being our technology platform. That one I started with a classmate of mine when I was studying in the UK, so we're actually students at the time. And so I guess our first incorporation would have been UK, and then we did US. And that was a function of, there's an incubator called Y Combinator, which is like a tech incubator in Silicon Valley. And they were very particular about us registering in the US. And that was probably, at that point in time, it wasn't big money, but when you're that early, all money is big money. And so like, to unlock this, we'll do that. And so I think the question is, one, can you be registered in Uganda and raise money versus not? It's interesting because certain investors won't invest in companies that aren't domiciled in their home country. So think about the support you're getting now. If you were a Delaware C Corp, you may not be able to eligible for this support you've gotten now. Especially many DFIs and stuff want to support companies homegrown in their market. And so I think it's more so coming, one, what do you see the growth path of your business and the markets you want to be in? And like, is it a Pan-African play, a global play? Is it local for now? And also making and investing in those costs at the right time. I think there are many guys who often spend a lot of money trying to restructure, flip their businesses to nice tax jurisdictions and not focus on actually building a business that's worth a good amount of money. But that being said, I think begin with the end in mind. And so in my journey, because of the investors I have typically raised from being international US technology investors, the reality is that they have more comfort in the US because of certain laws and precedents that exist to protect investors in that space. But that being said, I mean, I think often if an investor wants to invest in a business and it's compelling, even if it's incorporated in a place that isn't necessarily favorable, often the investor will say, fine, I want to invest this amount of money, and a CP accreditation precedent for me to invest is that you think about reincorporating to X. And so I think often there's that conversation to be had. And so you don't want the tail to wag the dog, I guess, as it were, but I think you can also be intentional about what you think about incorporation, depending on what you're building.
All right. Thank you for that. I hope, Maxima, that answers your question. Daniel?
I have two questions. One is a follow-up to Maxima's question, and it really speaks to investors wanting companies domiciled or having holdings in tax havens. Maybe for Africa, probably Mauritius appears more attractive. Is that something that you've encountered in your journey? Because usually there's an issue how they repatriate profits and the taxation and all that. That's one. Then the second one, from your journey, how have you navigated the issue of valuations? Because that's, I mean, from trying to attract investors, we always get the issue of valuations, and they probably have one view, you have another view. How have you navigated that? And any advice to us as well would be welcome. Thank you.
No, happy to share that, Daniel. And I mean, so the point, I guess, your first question around like, investors pushing for particular geographies and stuff. So I think in our journey early on, we experienced it. I think some of my portfolio companies I've invested in. So I invested in a fintech company in South Africa. And I know, so our Series B, there was an international investor, actually Queensbridge Capital, which is any hip hop artists out there or lovers. Nastia Jones is an investment vehicle, and then Kona Capital, which is a global fintech investor. They actually were fairly insistent on them bringing out their equity, their IP outside of South Africa, because again, they were not comfortable with the South African treatment of IP and loop structures around exchange control. And for example, you invest the money in, but then it's difficult to get it out. But more often than not, there are different jurisdictions that people or investors, I find international investors are comfortable with. And so it's more so having that conversation about what is more comfortable. But again, even in that instance there, it wasn't a small round. They said like, look, we understand you aren't incorporated in a nice place now, but for us to make the money flow, we will do that. I invested in a business in Kenya probably 2 years ago, and it was a smaller early stage business, and a similar conversation was had. It wasn't like, oh no, you are incorporated in Kenya, we won't invest. Often if that's the case, then either one, you weren't that compelling, or two, they have their own agenda in that regard. So again, I think always have some thoughts around it. But when the time's right, consider doing it. I mean, like, they actually don't don't wait to become $1 billion business and then try to make the switch, because that's going to be a very costly exercise. But if there's opportunity and you think you want to even separate out, let's say, Operation Co and IP Co, if you're an IP heavy business, then that way you still have your local presence, but you have your IP, for example, somewhere else where your investors are able to invest in that particular business. So it's not necessarily an either or in that particular structure. I guess then to value, I mean, so what is value, right? Value is perceived. The same way, you know, when I walked into this room, it's a very hot day, and like a rookie, I came out with a very big jacket on. And so Brenda gave me water. I would have given her a lot more money for the water when I walked in now, because now I've got 2 bottles of water. And so same thing with your company, it's willing buyer, willing seller. And what you often find is if there's a price point at which you aren't comfortable setting equity in your business, then you don't have to sell it, right? Obviously you need the money. But I think for me, that's often more art than science. And now that's, I guess, on a philosophical level, but ultimately, depending on where you are in your business and stage, the one benefit is there are comparables and benchmarks. I think in this investment environment, it is a bit tough to get normalized, because I found in the last 2 years, pricing was a bit hot and valuations were a bit high relative to fundamentals. And so it was difficult to have a very, like to say, numbers-driven conversation around valuation. It's almost like, no, that guy raised a $50 million post money, therefore I want that as well. As opposed to being like, I've got this kind of revenue growing at this rate, and you will get X amount of money back if you come in at a minimum of this price. And I think that's where things are going back to those kind of, let's call it, valuation metrics. I was catching up with a friend of mine in December, and he's a company called WeFox. It's probably the biggest insurtech in Europe. So they're worth about 6 billion, 7 billion euros. And the guy's just a machine when it comes to fundraising. And I guess his tip, which I think is, I guess, spoiler, but I guess as an investor, don't come and try this on me. But like, what he will do is he'll typically go and find all the rounds at his stage in his industry and say, what's been the biggest round in that sector? And then he will make what he asks for 50% more than what that biggest round was. And then he straight face goes and, like a wrecking ball, will raise the money at that valuation. And true to form, he's got some of the best investors on his cap table, and he's raised probably north of €1 billion in whatever the last 7-8 years. And so often when it comes down to those conversations, it's about how you as a founder are able to position what you're trying to build when you're showing your passion for what you're doing, and almost creating a sense of, you know, I was speaking to one of our early US investors. Actually, he didn't invest in us, he was just looking at the market. And he asked him, how come there's so much capital flowing in the US versus Africa? And he said there's not enough. He said, if you go to the US and you speak to some of those early stage investors, everyone can talk about how they missed Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they missed an Uber. But in Africa, they haven't been, and now they are starting to be big exits or lots of money made where someone can say, oh no, I missed a Paystack or Flutterwave or Go1. And so often investors invest because of FOMO. And so if they realize someone big is in the round, you often realize that your valuation gets put up. And so I think the best way to, as an entrepreneur, improve your valuation is to have excess demand, which ultimately means you have multiple investors looking at your company, and you're able to run a proper process around that. Saying like, look, you know, I'm showing this information, we're looking to get term sheets by this time, or indicative offers, we're having our data room open at this point in time. And so you almost get that point where there are multiple offers coming in for your business to maximize the valuation. But often there are standard metrics that do exist. And obviously as a micro insurer, a micro lender, there are many comparables for you to look at to get a sense of giving your traction exactly where should you be landing.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, because last week we were having the same conversation with Maxima around valuation, and she had some strong opinions around how a potential investor was valuing her business. So Maxima, I think this conversation comes in very, very handy, right? Yeah.
It's absolutely important to, it was nice to hear this. Perception is key.
Yeah, perception is key. Yeah, so we were also joined by Jean. So Jean, just kindly introduce yourself, who you are and the kind of business you're running before we can move on to the next question.
Okay, great. Let me try to put my camera on. Yeah, Melvyn, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Great to connect. I always enjoy listening to you. The last time I met with you was in Africa Arena in South Africa. And,
yes, get
but I never had the one-on-one with you. So today we have one. Yeah, my name is Jin, and I'm the chief executive of a company called Quest Digital Finance, though more popularly known as Akelo Banker. And what we really do is to provide digital infrastructure to enable the cooperatives or agricultural service providers to be able to utilize our infrastructure, then integrate or bundle products and services which enable their members to, or the users to transact, which really catalyzes the transactions within these institutions. I'll give an example of the cooperatives or circles. So we digitize that operation, then identify the key products and services which the members of the cooperative or the circle or a microfinance would want to access via their mobile, which includes inputs, extension services, for hires, insurance, and they're able to access all that via our platform and on credit. So of course, we have over 150 about 150 cooperatives who are using our platform and over 200,000 smallholders. And now we are integrating the MSMEs as well to use our infrastructure, again, using the cooperative as an anchor partner within the local community. So that is what we do as a company since 2016 to date where we are. And I see colleagues I'm familiar with here. And yeah, I want to agree with what Maxima was indicating around valuation and the likes. But I think maybe the question, if I may, Brenda, and if this is okay, I just wanted maybe to ask, yeah, the question, what I would want maybe you to guide on is beyond valuation. I've seen most companies being able to raise money even when they are not making any revenue. And you might even think like, okay, there's nothing really interesting. Okay, the only thing which is interesting here is the sector and the industry, but they're not breaking even, but they go on ahead and raise lots of money. And this is very good with the West African countries and now Nairobi at the same time. What magic is there that enables such people to raise that money? Yeah. Is it an issue of they just know how to position and brand and communicate their offering, or they are just positioned in the industry and they're speaking about what is trending at the point, say payments, digital credit or something like that, that they really attract that, or something actually has value which can be unlocked in the future or even can be unlocked now, or people are just making sure that they're able to raise money and they exit and they go and do other things. Even if it fails, it doesn't matter. Thank you.
No, and I think it's a valid point, and I think the answer is actually a bit of everything you've described, right? Because ultimately an investor wants to get a return. And so they have to have a sense that someone down the line is either going to buy the business at a valuation more than what they paid, for whatever reason, whether there's underlying value there or they have revenues or not, or they can exit for something meaningful. And so often, what's the limitation, right? So I ask myself, in building out our business, so our business is worth north of $2 billion, and like we're fortunate to have good growth. But if I only had a vision to build the business only in Uganda, would I have been able to get the valuation I got? Unlikely, because the market's not big enough to allow me to grow to meet that kind of audience or scale of growth. And so for me, it's often about understanding the opportunity, being able to articulate the opportunity and how what I'm building or what I'm offering is best placed to capture the opportunity. And then obviously show that I am my team, the right people to execute to get to that opportunity. And that's when you, like invariably, you see the hockey stick of every business where it goes from making losses to being hyper profitable in 1 year, which never really happens. But next year, like, oh, I've seen some businesses do it, but it's very rare depending on the sector you find yourself in. And it's always from early stage. Obviously, more mature businesses like many of yours, you guys be profitable, you're doing well, you're growing. I think often the businesses, I mean, there's a business that we looked at in the logistics space, they've been around for the last 15 years. breaking even, doing well. I mean, and now in the last 2 years, they've gone to north of $100 million in terms of revenue, and they're highly profitable and cash flush. So often it's a step change or inflection point in the business that isn't necessarily related to the capital. But I think to your question more directly in terms of why other ecosystems are raising more money, or easier raising money, I think one, it comes down to, I think, the entrepreneurs being able to articulate what they're building and the opportunity they're looking to capture, and doing so in a way that captures the imagination. When there's no revenue, you have to have imagination, but the imagination and the actual minds of the investors. And I think, I mean, if you only spend time in Nigeria, I mean, you take an Uber in Nigeria and the driver's trying to picture an idea that they're building on the side. And so you do find there's lots of practice in there, but in the same vein, it's the confidence with which they often show up. I mean, like, you know, so being Ugandan myself, I think often as Ugandans, we can sometimes be a bit apologetic about what we're building.
Yeah.
And that can work against us. Yes, everyone will say Ugandans are nice, amicable people, but I think when it comes down to being confident, showing up and saying, this is my business I'm building, this is where I want to take it, and I would like to give the opportunity to come in on the ground floor on this journey, I think we often almost are reticent in that regard. And so it is a blend of the articulation, like you mentioned, the size of the market to the team, and also showing that you have a play to the point, I think, outside of Uganda purely, which I think is an important one to consider.
All right, thank you for that. I think the last one is quite important. We need to be able to articulate and capture our opportunities better during our discussions with investors. Ali, your hand is up. Please go on with your question. Hi, Ali.
Sorry,
Ali,
I was just struggling to sorry, I was just struggling to get off mute there. The fundraising process is quite involved, whether it's debt, whether it's equity, and I speak for myself where I'm very much involved with a lot of the operational dynamics of the business at the moment. So for me to go down this road of focusing on fundraising takes me away from my main business. Do you or have you felt that hiring or working with an advisory firm or a group to prepare your business to be investor ready, or to go out and help liaise with the potential investors has been helpful? Or did you run this process yourself? And how did you manage the dynamics between running your business and raising money? It's almost as if raising money is a business in itself.
And the big business, I think that's why the investment banks need to make so much money, even despite their failings.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, it's an important trade-off. And I think as an entrepreneur, I found that to some extent I'm always raising, but I'm not always raising. In that, like, you're always going to meet investors, they're always going to bump into you, and you're always going to have to like pitch and be ready to, and the person's going to lead your IPO around is the person you're going to have to nurture and speak to about your business on the journey. But I think your point around the trade-off of, I'm in my business, I'm operating, now I have to go and like do mini speed dating, and takes me away from actually building my business. And sometimes you spend so much time on the fundraise that your business metrics start going backwards. Now you're like, this is the point of the exercise. And so it is also about knowing what aspect of the fundraising you as a founder, CEO are best at. I think no investor is going to invest without meeting the CEO/founder. I mean, I find myself as an investor, I mean, if I'm having a first meeting, obviously there's some early meetings with associates and the team members, but I say as a partner or head of a fund, like if I'm in a meeting and the CEO is not in the meeting, then for me, I'm almost like saying, then clearly it's not something important for your business. So, but you being in the meeting versus you creating your data room or drafting long form legal documents is a different kettle of fish. And so from that perspective, I think it's about understanding, as I'm sure all of you know from your experience, what are the elements of fundraising and where is the key for you to play in. And to your point, also create the contingency and the capacity in the business so that if you are able to step out of the business, for example, when you step out to take a meeting, it shouldn't kill your business, but you need to go on the roadshow and that kind of stuff, you have that support. It's interesting your point around advisors, right? So I think as you break down what it means to fundraise, advisors can play a very particular role. So they can, yes, like, you've got support now in terms of making sure you're fundraising ready. And that may involve many things, clear value proposition, your governance is right, you've got your data room, your financials in a good order, you know exactly what you want, how you're going to spend the money, all those good things. And sometimes an advisor can actually help you get there, because as an investor, I speak to an entrepreneur and they don't know their business or know key, and I'm not saying you're a bad entrepreneur, but you hear stories of like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, when he first met with John Doerr, his first investor from Kleiner Perkins. And I think John asked him, so like, you know, how many things have you shipped today? Or whatever it was. And I think, you know, Jeff Bezos went through his laptop and did like a SQL query and pulled up the number, and like it showed that he knew where to get the information, even though he didn't know the information. And that was something which John was like, look, you're running a complex operation, I get it. And it shows if you don't have the information on top of your hand, you know where to pull it from. And that's important. So don't necessarily go there like cramming all your numbers, but it's about that point of showing a deep understanding of the drivers of value of your business. And that I think is hard to get an advisor to articulate. I also know, I think if you are running with an advisor, something, so we invested in a fintech, I want to mention, where earlier this year, and throughout the process, we weren't aware that there was an advisor in the process. And when we were about to pay away, literally I was flying in from the US and we were closing the deal on the Friday, I was in the air most of the day. And what wasn't disclosed to us in the budget was how much the advisor was charging, because the advisor was actually charging them more than market, like a lot more than market. So literally like 10% of the money we were giving this company was going towards an advisor. And obviously signed the agreement before we came in and all that good stuff. But for us, we almost didn't make that investment on the day we were meant to, because we've done DD, legal, long form docs for the last 3 months, everything. But because there was an advisor in there, we weren't aware of, it wasn't disclosed to us. We took a step back and felt like, one, that was disingenuous. And two, we felt like if an entrepreneur is willing to pay a silly amount of money that's out of market, not saying you shouldn't have an advisor, out of market for an advisor, where else are they not focusing on their business? And so I think it goes both ways, but I think what advisors are sometimes good at is to get you in front of the right investors, because the reality is, as entrepreneurs, you want to have the biggest network of investors to create that pool. But I think it's about being very clear when you're having, if you choose to have an advisor, what you're expecting to deliver on, and also what's the maximum you're willing to pay them. Because the reality is, no advisor is going to, because the advisor, not a fundraiser, or even if they're a fundraiser, I'm going to go end to end. And so often you think, oh, fine, I'll give someone 2% of the fundraise, because what I'm going to do is say yes to a few decks, sign a document, the money of my account, and those everything else. It's very rarely the case. And so that's where it comes down to expectations as well of between yourself and the advisor. And so I guess direct to your question, one, advisors can be helpful to supplement where you feel either your company or yourself are deficient, because a good financial manager isn't necessarily a good fundraising CFO.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to consider.
All right. I think that was very clear, Ali. I hope that answers your question. Maxima, your hand is up. And Sean, we would like to hear from you as well. So maybe after Maxima, we can hear from you.
Okay, so I did a simple search about you, Melvyn, and then I noticed that you have several awards, the Linda's Awards, and then the Forbes 30 Under 30. My first question is, did your presence, did your winning of the awards add some flesh to your fundraising activities? Did they open you up to bigger doors? And how do we also get to position ourselves to, win these awards? That's one. The other thing is, two, you spoke about the Y Combinator, which is an extremely amazing space to be in Silicon Valley. Now we're in Africa. Are there other similar opportunities for people in Uganda? Because when you're talking, your companies are all domiciled outside Uganda, right? South Africa is like another European nation, really. So what, plus over 40% of Africa's wealthiest are in South Africa, which is a huge number for just one economy. So for us here in Uganda, what can we do also to maybe place ourselves in similar combinators that are much more profitable, instead of the ones that keep cropping up here in Uganda and really lead you nowhere? Yeah, that's my question.
So I think two things, right? I think no single award, accolade, having a good surname, going to a good school is going to get you money. It will get you into the door, get you the interview. So yes, whatever. There was a Forbes issue in December where they spoke about African unicorns, and that was valuable, and it was like, oh, hey, people said, hey, Malcolm, we saw you there, let's chat. But no one's going to give me money because I'm on the Forbes list or because I went to Oxford or because none of that, like those things, it just almost is a part of helping someone build rapport, because ultimately what we often forget is people invest in people. People buy from people. And so if those things enable you to build more rapport, gain more credibility, more trust sooner, it can help with the fundraising process. So those things can be helpful. I think the one thing which I would heat against, I see a lot of it happen because there's just so many awards to win these days, is people focus on winning awards and grants as opposed to building their businesses. I was speaking to a guy that sold his business to a big UK listed company, and you're saying, Melvyn, in my day, we actually had to have customers and revenue to actually grow our businesses. But now everyone focuses on, like, you know, they see fundraising as a milestone. Because I would argue the best companies aren't fundraising because they don't need to, because they build good profitable models, they've got good cash flow, but that being said, in the current environment, I think cash can be a key asset to scale your growth, but it's not a foregone conclusion that because you've raised that you're a better company than someone who hasn't raised. And so I think it's something to consider. I remember once, okay, story for another day, but I mean, the many entrepreneurs who I know who haven't raised. I mean, I was once speaking to the founder of Zoom, Eric Yuan. So I mean, we had lunch in 2019, and he like I'm gonna go IPO in 2 years' time at like a $1.2 billion valuation he was hoping for. Ended up IPOing for like 20 billion, but nevertheless, what he did very well was he was very clear in saying, because I want to get there, these are the partners I need. And so an investor he took on at that point in time was a company called Sequoia. And he took 100 million from Sequoia, $100 million, but he didn't even use the money. He literally put the money in a bank account and said, like, look, I want to partner with Sequoia because of their expertise as opposed to their money. And so I think same thing like awards are only going to be enablers to maybe get the right investors to maybe unlock the capital, but they won't necessarily get you the capital. But I won't discount that I've been very fortunate to be honored by some organizations in terms of going on our journey. And I think in relation to, I guess, the second question, which I played back to you, was more around, so in terms of, I guess, again, coming down to geographies, so, you know, raising and other incubators similar to Y Combinator available here. I think, you know, funny enough, actually, this is really interesting. So I'm a fairly active venture capital investor these days. I run a fund, I co-invest, all these good things. And most investors I speak to are reluctant to invest in Y Combinator companies. Because two things. One, because Y Combinator companies, you pay an unnecessarily high premium because guys think after YC, all of a sudden they walk on water, even though a few months ago they were the same company. And two, often people struggle to get the right kind of terms and securities for the amount of money they invest in the typical YC safe type document. And so it's interesting because literally now, like, I've sat in meetings with guys that are like, guys managing $500 million funds, and they're like, you know what? It's a YC company, it's too expensive, we'll just go somewhere else. So I think it's a double-edged sword in the ecosystem. But I think what does YC provide that does well? So it does provide a name and a brand and a cachet. I mean, there's some good companies that come to Y Combinator. Two, it provides support in terms of its partners will offer you office hours and you can speak to them and so forth. And what I really enjoyed about YC, I mean, so at the time I did YC, I was busy writing my dissertation with Andrew at Oxford. And I used to procrastinate from my writing dissertations, calling customers late at night, because I think like midnight in California was like middle of the day here in Uganda. And what YC helped me do was create pressure for me to push, because it's only a 3-month program and there's a demo day where you demo your success over those 3 months. And so the brand name, advice on the partners, and maybe the pressure and the artificial deadline of demo day. But to be fair, all of those things can be achieved outside of the ecosystem. I mean, the last one, you focus on your business and pushing, is something you can set for yourself. In terms of getting access to networks and good mentors, the reality is, you know, the same way you're able to Google me, and I'm on this call now, and there are many other great entrepreneurs in Uganda and around Africa who actually are more relevant to you than even like Peter Thiel and some of the big partners in Y Combinator in building their businesses. And so you can get access to that fairly easily today. And I'd argue then, from a brand perspective, it's about then, how do you build the brand of your business to the point that people want to invest in it? And so for me, often when someone wants to give me an award or say, come speak to us or do an interview, my hack is to focus on my businesses, not myself. And so I won't like do interviews and that kind of stuff for free if it's not for either one, growing the ecosystem, or two, growing my businesses. And I think that's how I often try to use those platforms to push my businesses, because ultimately that will help me get a similar sort of brand recognition as you would get, let's say, being on the YC list.
Okay. Maxim, I hope you're happy with that response. I think it was quite clear. Sean, do you have any question at this time?
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. One of the things that stood out to me is you saying that investors are heavily motivated by FOMO, which I thought was very interesting. And it made me think, what are those spaces which investors are interested in Africa, and maybe in Uganda specifically? What are those areas that investors are looking to get involved with?
Yeah. And so in terms of the spaces, so where there are, let's call it big challenges, that's often where there's a big opportunity to create something that creates value and capture that value. So, and the good thing is, or the bad thing is, in Africa, and even particularly Uganda, there's certain sectors where there are just inefficiencies, challenges, and therefore the opportunity to make lots of money. Yeah. Education being one of them. And so obviously my background is more in education and ed tech, but I feel it's, so I would say education is still hot, climate and impact, but obviously impact covers education and a few other things as well, but climate, green, big push there around that. I think employment, job creation, I think being able to, I'm speaking to Clark, Sean, your area, but more like being able to link employment to skilling, to like, competency-based training, like how do you make someone more employable? To just use unemployment is a big one. Because also you have to ask, who are the biggest investors in most of our African countries? Obviously, yes, you have some VCs, but they're very few VCs, real money. Yes, we have some funds, but the biggest ones are going to be the guys who often have that more developmental DFI lens. Like, I'll be straight, if you're building the metaverse for Uganda, you'll probably struggle to find money to build that business. Even though if you're building the metaverse in the US, you probably raise crazy amounts of money. And so it's almost saying, what problem are you solving unique to where you find yourself? And how is your approach to solving that problem unique to the markets, taking into account those dynamics? And also what I find now is that often it's also about hand in glove, right? Often the investors can be pure financial investors, or let's say impact investors, the DFIs and so forth. But there's also a big move for international, almost strategic investors to come into the market. So if I'm an international university group, as an example, and I want to get a foothold in Africa, I will then think about who is my best partner to unlock that value. And I think that's a unique position, which I think is happening a lot more now, because most of these developed countries are struggling for growth on a macro level. And so they're looking to emerging markets to be able to push that growth. And so being able to position yourself as being that natural ally. And when you think about, that's what Rocket Internet did, a la Jumia, Allo, what was running now? It was running Jumia, but I don't know the companies in Uganda. Yeah, Jumia Foods and all these. Okay, now they're all called Jumia. But in Ron and I was run here at the Jumia, you set up Jumia, we were Oxford together, and we're deciding whether they want to take the offer. I mean, it was still like, it was Hello Food or something of that nature. It was Hello Food back then. But what they did very well was they were able to say, fine, and it hasn't yet come to fruition, but it's almost saying, which international peers could we partner with, or could this be a natural acquisition for down the line, because they're building a similar business, but in Africa. And I think that's where you also have that mindset around opportunity. So to your question, I think one sector-wise, ones that excite me, I'll best shoot directly is, so one, education, two, green, financial services, there's still some stuff to be done there, but I think there are many fintechs or fintech stakes. So I think you need to be very clear on the value you add in that space. Agri, very big on that, because I think we have such a natural endowment in that space, but it's about doing, how do you do that better than somebody else? I have a bit of a gender lens when I invest, and so I really like to see, like, either if you're not helping women, like women entrepreneurs, and how you're upskilling that, because I feel like there's a missing gap there. That's more so from a personal experience perspective. And the final piece is infrastructure, both digital and I guess logistical infrastructure, just because I think many people raise very large infrastructure funds. But I think very smart solutions can bridge that divide around logistics and even digital infrastructure as well.
Okay. Yeah, so I know we had asked for just an hour of Melvyn's time, but the conversations just seem to be really interesting and going. So Melvyn, if you will allow us to have just 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll close the session. Jean,
I'll go first. I'll go first.
Oh, okay.
Because I've been spoken. Sorry, Melvyn, thank you very much for your time. My name is Dr. Tadeo Wire, the CEO and founder of Agribiz. I've had a discussion with Alvin over time, and I'm telling him, okay, the landscape, the investment landscape in Uganda is really struggling. If you look at the research, you look at the figures that are standing out there, we don't even fit in the 10 most suitable countries investors are looking to invest in. Actually, in the 10, you would even find Kenya and Tanzania as on the lower list. And Rwanda is actually up there in the 4th. And so we are really very disadvantaged. But with that said, there is no hope is all not lost. I think what we need now to do is to strongly build a network of people like you and see how to help us, first of all, position our institutions, and also if there are opportunities that we can work together on to attract investors. If there are an exposure that we could invest ourselves in to expose our businesses in. Of course, previously the landscape has all been dominated by Indians, so nobody should lie to you that investment in Uganda has been for Ugandans. It has all been for foreign people. But now we are coming up and saying, okay, we can do this, but we're taking baby steps, and we cannot take those baby steps successfully unless we have networks, unless we pick bank on successful institutions to do that. And that is my quest. If there's any network that you can connect us, if there are any support that you can do together with the financial deepening, and I want to thank them once again for trying to position ourselves, putting the right foot in the right place. That's my take. Thank you very much.
I mean, I know there's more comment than a question, but I think don't discount how much money there is in your home economy. You know, it's something which I often reflect on, and even more so now when I do deals and stuff, like private equity, even bigger deals and stuff, is you'd be surprised how much money there's in the country. So there's so many wealthy people in Uganda who could fund, I'm sure, many of the businesses on this call without even scratching their net worth. And so, yes, we'll often think about the big numbers and be like, yes, there are billions of dollars elsewhere, and the guys in Nigeria raising money and the guys that have money. But the reality is, there is so much money in country. And yes, to convince those guys, often more old school, family offices, whatever, to give you money may be harder, but they actually will understand the opportunity better. And I think, so don't discount, I think, the local players and the local, let's call it capital of industry, high net worth families, because they will, one, understand the problem better than any international person would. And then two, they'll have more trust in terms of what you're building, in terms of saying, oh, I get it. And that's why it almost pushes you to say, international investor, you can go and say, I'm building in Africa, I'm solving this problem, we're helping the youth, you can speak to all the key points they care about, but they won't deeply understand. I was speaking to a guy, actually, when I was flying here last night at the airport, he's okay. Anyway, he built one of Africa's biggest businesses, a unicorn, and he stepped up now starting a new business, and he was looking at us to invest in it. And he was telling me about how, often speak to US investors, they don't ask the same questions African investors do because they don't understand it. And you often want to invest that understands. And so I would argue, I would almost task to say, which investors locally can you go to, and not necessarily investors, which people who have money, because I think not necessarily someone that says, I'm an investor, but I have lots of money, and see if you can convince them to give you that initial capital, the capital you require. Because what I'll tell you now is there's enough money even in Uganda to fund most of our businesses, but often we just don't know how to articulate it to get that ultra high net worth to open up their purse strings and invest. I think many of them do want to invest in Uganda. I mean, so this president was down in South Africa a few weeks back. I know many of the business delegates came with him. So I had dinner with Taturia, had lunch with Charles Mbiria, and both of them are very keen to invest in Uganda. And they think of ways in which they can leverage their understanding, their exposure, and obviously their networks in Uganda to create more value. And so we invested in a business called Numida in Uganda with Serena Williams and others. And it was interesting. I mean, even speaking to Charles was like, actually, I'd never heard of Numida. I didn't know what these guys were doing. And this is supposedly a leading fintech in Uganda. And so you often just assume that because you're at a certain scale, you've done they did Y Combinator, they raised from Serena Williams. Like, these are guys, you're a tech crash, they come everywhere. Yet the most influential person who arguably, as someone big in the telco, should be very close to fintech, isn't aware of them. and so often don't discount that visibility point.
Yeah, and I think the point that you raised there is around information flow, and it's part of the mandate of the deal flow facility, because we note that there's an information gap. There are businesses in the market that are looking to raise, there are investors that are looking to deploy capital, but they don't know about each other's existence. So there's an information gap that we recognize in Uganda today, and I know for a fact that there is work that is being done towards that. But also, like Melvyn mentioned, Tadeo, sometimes you just need to be confident and articulate your business better to some of these local investors. Jean, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. Melvyn, I think this is the most lousy question you may have ever come across, but you're going to take it because you're the right person. So, first of all, I think all investors ask for how much money you need and what for. And the question to you is that what are those areas which actually investors usually want money to be deployed in, and in what ratios? Then to follow up on that, have you or any of the investors you are familiar with ever turned down to invest in any company owing to the fact that they have a lot of cash and your money would not add value or create any impact to that company? And you just say, you know what, this is a good company, this is a good startup or whatever, but if we give them this money, it's going to kill them, and we are going to lose all for that reason. And the third question you answered, I was going to ask you about if whether or not you are active in Uganda, and what can make you become active in Uganda. And in that case, maybe you can go off like within what we have told, just from off your mind. Within what we have communicated as different companies here on this call, I don't know if the best question should be, are you seeing some opportunities, or could you give feedback on what you think the communication and the packaging of the pitch or the presentation any one of us or all of us have done, and you're able to say, hey, I think I understood yours, and I think it is in this direction. And yes, I will be having an appetite for that. And I want to speak with you next. Thanks.
No, and different questions. I think even to take the first one, the last one first, I think. So I think obviously for many of you, so one, I invest out in vehicles. I mean, so ultimately we're early stage tech fund. I think some of you, either one, probably too late for us, and two, not necessarily in our sweet spot when it comes to technology and using tech in your businesses. So also it's important to know, I guess, from an investor perspective, what's the investor mandate, and also like what is their focus in that particular way. And also, I guess the only thing I would say to give grace to it is, many of you, I don't even know like what metrics you have, what growth you have, to the point of information. So I don't even know, like I never want to assume that like I'm an early stage investor and you guys could all be well beyond where my capital can actually add value in your businesses, which I guess is a segue to the point you mentioned first around, have you seen a business where like you're doing well and you're like, look, actually my money won't go far here, whatever, I want to invest. And that happens a lot, because for me, where I am now, I mean, so I've probably made 30, 40 investments in businesses over the last 10 years or so. And the reality is, now where I'm at in the check side typically right now, it's about making sure I get the most value for the money that we deploy, because ultimately I have certain objectives that I'm trying to achieve both for myself and for my co-investors in the structure. And the rate is, certain businesses, just either because of their growth trajectory or because of the valuation they're offering me, won't get me there. And I think that's the other point around valuation. I think for me, if I find that a valuation is a bit too punchy, and I would rather not argue with an entrepreneur, I'd rather say no upfront, just because I also know that how I perceive value may be different towards another investor. And so as being an entrepreneur myself, the worst thing you can do is have a long no or slow no, as opposed to a quick no. And so for me, that's often what I try to do. But in terms of businesses, I'm like, look, these guys are doing very well. In my investment vehicle, Brigham, we like to invest in companies where we're able to add value and we have experience in. just because it allows us to ensure that we're able to use all of our networks and exposure to help the business grow. And so there's certain spaces where we don't have exposure and we haven't built businesses in them. And so that's why, for me, it's more so the point of the hand club approach, less around. So businesses I've seen, I'm like, look, that's a very interesting space. Sounds amazing. The numbers are incredible, but I don't think I can add significant value to that particular entrepreneur, that business, because of the space they're in, the stage they're at, or the market they're in. There's certain markets I don't have much exposure in or networks in. And so investors sometimes do say no to deals or with opportunity to partner with businesses, because I see myself as an investor, as a partner to a business and a business builder. And I can't build a business where I feel like I can't have value in that process. Whereas if you're just like a angel investor, investing tickets here and there, you don't really care. You put whatever, a couple $1,000s there or whatever it is, without having a clear sense of, I want to be a partner on this journey of building. So that's why, for me, an understanding of the kind of investor or the person you're speaking to and what else they have built or what else they have exposure to is important. I mean, I was speaking to one of the wealthiest guys in South Africa yesterday, probably top 3 wealthiest guys in South Africa, worth a couple $1 billion. And he was saying, Melvyn, in my family office, we invest in anything, but when we invest, we want control. And for most entrepreneurs, they want to control is a no. And so that's a quick exclusion. Even if the business is growing incredibly well, they'll say, no, look, we're not doing that. And so it's important to understand that. And so to your question, I have said no to businesses where I thought I couldn't add value, or my money wouldn't be my value add, not my money, my value add, and what I offer as Melvyn, as Brigger, as my investment fund would not be valuable to entrepreneur. Because remember, if you don't perceive the value I'm bringing, then we'll have a different conversation around where we land on pricing and so forth.
Okay, I think we will end it there. One last one for me, Melvyn, before we close. Just like you said, no, you're able to say no to some of these companies, investing in these companies. Is it okay for entrepreneurs to say no to investors? Because sometimes we've interacted with entrepreneurs and they're very desperate for money. They take whoever says yes to them, and then later regret it. And it's conversations that we've had with them in the past. So is it okay to hold on until the right investor comes along?
And so look, keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is being able to achieve your purpose by building and scaling your businesses. And if you have 2 months of runway, don't be precious about where you get the money from. I think the worst thing to do in this current environment is I've seen many entrepreneurs who I've spoken to in the last year where they were fairly strong in how they were showing up, their valuations. I said, guys, it's a bit too rich for me. And invariably, they've come back 9 months later, 12 months later, with less runway, less revenue, and now it's a different conversation. And so don't put yourself at a disadvantage, but also comes down to how much do you back yourself. But that being said, don't say yes to the wrong partner. And that's why if you understand, look, I'm just solving for the money, then structure it such that all you're doing is giving the money. I mean, now this is a bit of the weeds here, but in any sort of transactional deal, there's 2 factors. It's economics and control. Economics being how much money, how much equity someone gets, and control being, they're getting board seats, or they're getting certain covenants, or they're getting certain restrictions on the business, on the cash. And so often people focus on the economics part, like what valuation are they giving me, how much money are they giving me, and often discount the negative controls on the board and the governance that someone wants from that. And often there's an amount of money which you actually don't care about the economics because the control is just so aggressive. And so I think in that process, I just always say, consider both sides of the equation, because I've seen some entrepreneurs sign some rather unfortunate term sheets and shoulder agreements. And not even because they were desperate, but because they didn't know better. And so I think that's something which I would just heed against. But I think to your question, you can say no to investors where if the economics and the control don't make sense for you.
Thank you for that and for that clarification. And thank you all. We've come to the end of our discussion today. I'd like to say thank you to Melvyn for taking time off. Melvyn is in the country for 7 hours, but he's given us an hour of his time, and we really appreciate that. And to you, Maxima, Jean, Sean, Daniel, Tadeo, and Ali, thank you so much for dialing in. And I hope this was a very good session for you, and I hope it added value to you as you go through this journey of raising capital and speaking to a couple of investors. So thank you for joining. And yeah, Melvyn, I don't know if you have any parting shots before we close this. Yeah,
I think one, remember that building a business, as you all know, is a very long journey. And so just be very intentional about how you take capital, when you take capital, who you take capital from, because that can both be an enabler and a blocker to your success.
yeah. All right. Thank you for those parting shots. Thank you, everyone. We will, please feel free to leave the meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.